Welcome to English Through History. We have our special guest speaker today for our interviews about different cultures. We have here Eric Flynn, who's an educator and also a novelist. Eric, Might of the Gods, I believe your book is called. Can you tell us a little bit about who you wrote the book for and why did you write?
Thanks for that opportunity. Right, so Might of the Gods. I wrote this for, but primarily, so it's a book of it's kind of a fantasy superhero book, and it's mainly geared towards non-native English speakers, but also just native English speakers who maybe kind of struggle with reading a little bit. It's the maturity level is maybe around high school and above, but the actual level of the text is much, much more simple than that. So it's really ideal for people who want a more mature story, but some much more digestible and easy to read text.
Okay, sounds great. You can find all the information about Eric's upcoming book in the descriptions below, so please check that out. We also brought you here specifically because you are an instructor of culture. You teach about Western culture to Koreans and more specifically American culture. So we really want to ask you about something related to American history, and you chose the history of the Hamburger. Can you tell us why you chose that topic, please?
Right. Well, a lot of times when people think about America, they think about, the hamburgers, right? It's the iconic American food, I suppose. And I know sometimes, especially American expats in other countries, they kind of, view that as a little bit of a stereotype, but what can I say? I'm a stereotype. I love hamburgers. So.
Sure. Okay, so to the history section of it, can you tell us when the first recorded mention of a hamburger was?
Yeah. So first of all, when we get into the earliest recorded mention of a hamburger, we get into what do you consider a hamburger. But actually, there have been records of burger-like foods as far back as the ancient Romans. Historians found this ancient Roman cookbook called Apicius, and in it they have a recipe for something called Isicia aumentata, which was basically minced beef or minced meat of some kind anyway, mixed with pine nuts and with garum sauce on it. Right, so that was the first one, and then there was also some mention of the Tartars actually traveling with some patties of like mutton underneath the saddles of their horses. Now that one is actually subject to some scrutiny. I've seen that stated as fact, but a lot of people, some people conclude that that actually might not be accurate, that there was a medieval historian who recorded that, and he might not have been speaking from experience or from authority on that one.
Sure. It's a problem when you get the older the history, the more difficult it is to authenticate the sources. So what you described, the meat, the minced meat, the tenderized meat, would you consider those to be a burger?
I personally would not. I think it needs the bread to have a burger, because if you had a piece of meat without bread, would you call that a sandwich? I don't think so. But anyway, so by that metric, the next closest, earliest thing that we can get to what we might consider a hamburger is a German food called, and pardon the pronunciation on this, Rundstückwurm, which was apparently eaten in Hamburg, Germany. And now this consisted of, I've gotten different reports on this. I've never been to Hamburg myself, but some sources have shown it as a picture of what to me looks like a hamburger between two pieces of bread. But other sources have shown it as like a piece of pork on a single round piece of bread with a gravy, and to me, that seems like the more accurate description: pork on a round piece of bread. And again, I would maybe not consider that a hamburger myself, but somewhat similar.
Sure. But, you know, there must be a connection, it being eaten in Hamburg, Germany, Hamburger. Is there anything connecting those?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so the thing was, Hamburg was really important when it came to trade between America and Europe, especially in regards to meat. It was kind of almost a meat mecca, as it were. But, you know, so in the late 1800s, a lot of Germans started emigrating to America, and they did that through Hamburg, Germany, from Hamburg to New York, as I understand it. And so they brought a lot of their food with them. Now, actually, one of the foods that they popularized wasn't the Rundstück Worm. It was something called frikadellen. All right. And what this was is it was kind of like a big sort of meatball. And later on, this kind of evolved into something called that was much more flat. And they started calling it Hamburg style steak, which in Korea they call hambak steak. I think the Japanese call it hambagu, I believe. So again, we're getting closer to a hamburger, but still no bun at this point.
Right. So when did they introduce the bun?
Okay, so this is where we get into the extra tricky part here. So there's a lot of different stories about who the first person was to make a hamburger. Now, I actually uncovered there was an article, and I believe it was the Washington Post, written by a gentleman named Eric Ofgang. And so he discovered this newspaper ad from the Boston Globe for a cookbook. And in this cookbook, in this advertisement, it lists among its recipes one for hamburger sandwiches is what they call it, hamburger sandwiches. And this was from 1891, and that's a really important date. You know, and this is really the first printed, as far as I know, the first printed record of something that we would of the word hamburger, really, as far as I know.
Sure. So, but I guess what you're describing, you're not really describing a bun. You're describing kind of bread.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, and so that's the interesting part too, is usually we think of hamburgers as having a bun, but this one had slices of bread, apparently. So it seems like the earliest hamburgers were on sandwich bread.
Interesting. Okay. So you mentioned earlier that several people claim to have been the inventor of the hamburger. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So there are several people that claim this, and let's go through some of these. Now, the first one was Lewis's Lunch. This is a diner that is located on the East Coast state of Connecticut. Now, I'm going to say no on this one. And the reason is they claim to have invented it in 1895, I believe. The story was that there was a customer that was in a hurry, and so the owner put some hamburger steak between two slices of bread. But remember, that article, or that newspaper clipping that we talked about earlier, that was 1891. So I think that's a no on that one. There was another one named Fletcher Davis. Now, he allegedly created this at the, I believe, 1904 World's Fair. Again, 1904, that's after that ad that we talked about. So I'm going to say no on that one. And then the third one are a couple of brothers named the Menchie's brothers, Frank and Charles Menchie's. The idea here was that they were selling sausage sandwiches at a fair in Hamburg, New York. They ran out of pork, and so they substituted it with beef. But again, there is no, as far as I've seen, there is no written evidence to back this up.
Right. So it seems like it's pretty murky. It's pretty complicated. Is there anyone else that claims to have invented it? Yeah,
there is one other guy. His name was Charles Nagreen. He's from Wisconsin. And they say he invented it in around 1885. They say that he was at a county fair, which is like a festival that we have in the various states in America. And he had something similar to like frikadellen, like meatballs or something, but people found it too inconvenient to eat. So he flattened it and put it between bread.
Sure. So maybe it was Green?
Maybe, the claim there stems from 1885. That was before the cookbook ad. So yeah, I don't have anything to refute that. Perhaps it's hard to say.
What do we know for sure?
Okay, so this is what we know for sure. Okay, so we know that the fast food restaurant chain White Castle, that was the first place to really start selling hamburgers between round buns on a large scale.
So not McDonald's, White Castle.
Yeah, right. White Castle and not McDonald's. White Castle opened in 1921, and McDonald's opened about 20 years later. And White Castle definitely did serve those on round buns. And they still have them today in America. They're little 2-ounce patties, I think, of ground beef with onions. They call them sliders.
Okay, so that's a lot of information. Let me ask your opinion. In your opinion, what's the most likely history of the hamburger?
Okay, so this is, if I were to condense all of it down, this is what I would say. I would say it started in Hamburg, Germany. They had, a lot of meat like the frikadellen, and then that evolved into hamburger steak when the German immigrants came to America. All right, now at this point, people started putting it between bread, and it's quite likely that multiple people thought of this idea at the same time. It's not quantum physics to figure out that you can put meat between two pieces of bread, right? And then once that happened, White Castle kind of evolved it a little bit, and then that's the hamburger that we know today.
Okay, so you mentioned White Castle as being the first fast food restaurant. Can you tell us a little more about White Castle itself?
Yeah, sure. And here we get into a little bit of the history of fast food. So now White Castle appeared around like the 1920s, right? And so at this time, the meat industry hadn't been doing very well. So there was a book called The Jungle that had been published. And the idea here was that the goal was to show how difficult life was for workers in the meat industry. But what it did is instead, it kind of let people know exactly how unclean and unsanitary the meat industry was. And so a lot of related businesses suffered because of that. Well, White Castle's idea was that they would be transparent about their preparation methods. Okay, every people would be able to see how the food was made. They used really clean stainless steel equipment, and so that was kind of where it all started. Now, technically, they were the first fast food restaurant, but there was kind of another business called A&W that actually existed before White Castle.
Can you explain a little bit more about A&W?
Yeah, so A&W, it started off as a root beer stand. And again, this was before White Castle. Root beer, for those who are not familiar with it, it's a soda. It's a sugary drink. There is no alcohol in it. Very popular in the States. And so there was a man named Roy Allen. And in 1919, he opened up this stand. And he, started selling, root beer and other things to people. And very often he had curbside service where you could drive your car up to it, and then the workers would take, whatever it was to the car.
An early version of a drive-through, perhaps?
Yeah, so that was the early version of the drive-through. And it's worth noting at this point, too, how kind of the development of the car, the automobile, and the development of fast food were kind of linked. There's a historian named Adam Chandler, and he wrote a book all about this, and he said, Henry Ford, the automobile, right? He sort of pioneered this idea of the assembly line, of interchangeable parts and standardization, and we see that in the food industry as well, right? And as cars became more widespread throughout America, there became much more of a need for faster paced food. Pretty soon curbside service turned into drive-through and all that sort of thing. Okay, so anyway, now after White Castle opened, Roy Allen who opened up this root beer stand, teamed up with a guy named Frank Lloyd Wright, no relation to the architect. Okay, and so Allen and Wright, A&W, they created the first A&W fast food restaurant. And they were also the first to claim to have put bacon on a hamburger. How true is that? I don't know.
Sure. So when did McDonald's appear, the McDonald's that we all kind of associate with it now?
Yeah, well, that's kind of a funny thing. I've looked around for this and I've gotten conflicting information, but it's sometime around the 1940s, the same time as In-N-Out Burger, for those of you who are familiar with the West Coast. But anyway, with McDonald's, there were two brothers, Maurice and Richard McDonald. And so they actually pioneered something that they called the speedy service system. And this is basically, instead of having waiters or waitresses bring the food to you, you would go to the counter. They would have food pre-made already underneath heating lamps, and so you could just go and pick it up. That was all the McDonald brothers. Later on, their business was bought out by the guy who sold them the equipment for their original restaurants, Ray Kroc. And anyway, and so he sort of expanded the franchise, and then after that, Burger King appeared, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and that sort of thing. And it was just, and the rest is history, as we would say.
Sure. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Eric, for your time. And please check out Eric's book and his webpage. All the details will be posted down below in the description. Thank you very much.
Thank you.